Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're going to start in a few minutes. You have the title of today's discussion on screen. You should be able to see it. Feel free to say who you are, where you're from in the chat. The chat is on the right-hand side of your screen. Gonna just wait a few more minutes for people to join us. Let me know if you have any problem with the sound, with the screen, but you should be able to at least see the slide with today's title. Okay, I'm gonna start in the chat and tell where I'm from so that you can all follow my example and tell us where you're from. We're gonna just start in a few minutes. Morning, Katie. Good afternoon, Julian. Good to see you again. Jenna, yes. Yeah, Jenna, Germany. We had about 70 people registered for the event. So the golden rule is that we usually get half of the registered participants, so we can expect 35, maybe 40 people joining us for the talk. It's going to be recorded, so if there's no issue, we should be able to share the recorded video soon. Okay, Serge, you have no micro nor camera, but you're with us, so you can chat about public issues. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. All right, so welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. It is a great pleasure to have the discussion today. First of all, my name is Thomas Cauvin. I'm sorry. I am based in Luxembourg, and today I will be moderating the discussion between three guests that we have to discuss this question, why and how to teach an introduction to public history. So it's part of an ongoing series on how to teach public history, why to teach public history. And this kind of course, an introduction to public history, is perhaps the most widespread type of course that we have in public history. And it's both very challenging and very rewarding. Very challenging because you're supposed in one semester to introduce students to a field which is still very vague with very different practices. So it is very challenging. It's also very rewarding because from my experience, you can touch on many different topics and many different aspects. And it's very rewarding to work with students on having a sort of definition of public history. So challenging, rewarding, and we wanted to have a discussion about your experience in teaching an introduction to public history. So I'm very happy to have three guests. Today we have Gundermann from the University of Cologne, who has a lot of experience in creating programs in public history and teaching public history. So from Germany. We have C²DH Clary from I wanted to be sure. So Coastal Carolina University in the United States. Am I correct, Katie? Cool. So we have been teaching public history and introduction to public history for several years. And we have George Poulados. Where are you, George? You're here. Who's a student at the Hellenic Open University. And we like to have different perspectives on public history, teachers, instructors, students. So I'm really looking forward to have this discussion today. The rule is pretty simple. you ask your questions in the chat. We divide the discussion into two halves. The first half is a discussion between Katie, Christine, and George. You ask your question, and the second half is basically answering your questions. You can also share your experience, share resources in the chat, or just comment in the chat, right? So without further ado, I will give the floor maybe to Katie with one very basic question. Why do you teach an introduction to publication? Why do you think we need such a class?
All right, thank you so much, Thomas, and welcome everybody. Happy to be here today. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, great. So I made a couple of notes this morning as I was thinking about this because I teach Intro to Public History at my university usually every fall semester, so at least once a year. And just for a little background, at my university, I'm the only public historian, and I'm based in a traditional history department. So, you know, we've always been sort of categorized by geographical areas, I guess, which I don't fit into. So I've been here for about 5 years. They never had public history classes before I was here. So one reason I've taught public history is almost like a recruiting ground for getting people into public history. My background is mostly in museum studies, so into that as well. And this is my 5th year here, and it's going really well. I've been able to create a cultural heritage certificate rather than, you know, another minor or major in public history. And that is in collaboration with art history and anthropology and archaeology. So that's been a really great partnership. But what I'm talking about is why Intro to Public History. So I've already touched on a little bit of that. But I thought to tell you why intro, I would tell you a little bit about how I teach my intro to public history class. So one of the main things we do in my intro to public history class to start is talk about the definition. So I'm sure you all are aware the definition of public history is there's not one really, there's not one specific definition. So something we spend a lot of time on in my class is defining public history and coming up with a sort of class definition that we can all sort of agree on. It's not always, you know, exactly, you know, everyone doesn't agree. So we talk about the definitions. We talk about topics, themes, and fields within public history. We talk about the best practices. And we do a lot of the theory, but something I find really important in my intro to public history class is also having my students do some sort of group collaborative work. That's something we all have to do as public historians. It's not something that usually happens in a vacuum. And so I think it's important to have students do that early on so they know what they're getting into when we get into more in-depth sort of classes. So sometimes I do have them work with a community, but usually we do sort of a theoretical project where they have to work with partners in the class. Other things about why Intro to Public History, it serves as a good foundation for other upper division classes. I teach a museums class where we actually do an entire museum exhibit, but the intro class is not a prerequisite. So I have students in my museums class right now who didn't take Intro to Public History. So, you know, the students who have had intro have that background, and they're able to, you know, sort of serve as leaders. Maybe it should be a prerequisite. I don't know. Something to discuss. I also use it, as I said earlier, as a sort of recruiting ground. So once people come into the public history class, they realize, you know, they're always, in the United States at least, told by their parents, you know, what are you going to do with a history degree? You're going to teach, or you're going to go become a lawyer. And so public history, by talking about themes, gives them other options and ideas. So they start to think, you know, I don't have to just be a teacher. There are other things I could do. So it serves as recruiting for the field, and also I think for just the history department. And related to that, also gives people those other career opportunities. So other ideas of things they can do. Yeah, public history to become a lawyer. Nice recruiting motto. And, in my public history class, I don't just have history students or anthropology or art history. My university is Coastal Carolina, so we have marine science. We have people who want to swim with dolphins or work in aquariums, or we have a lot of business students or communication. So public history is good for historians, but it also has other principles and skills that students can learn and take with them into any field, I would say. So that's just sort of a brief intro of why and how I do my intro. So I think we were going to take a few minutes to sort of discuss that amongst myself and George and Christine.
Thank you, Katie. Christine, George, who wants to follow up?
I can. George, if that is okay for you?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay. I have encountered now many similarities, I think, between Katie's approach and an approach that I find most common in German universities. I have to admit that right now, I think the master program in Cologne is the only one within Germany that has an obligatory introduction course. And actually, it's an introduction module that consists of 2 to 3 courses. So we have quite a lot of space to really make an introduction. Such an introduction in form of those courses, especially designed for the beginning of a study program, is, I think, of vital importance for the success of a master program in public history, because it constitutes a start of a program. It is not only an entry point for the students, but enables them to form a group. And I can only say, yes, group work is very important for that. And it also enables them to form a first network, which I also find very important. Ideally, this introduction is given by the head of the study program, as Katie, you already told us. And I think we in Germany still lack a bit of the full professors for public history, but it is very important to have someone there who is not only there at the beginning, but also at the end. So someone who not only accompanies, but can lead the students through the whole master program. And of course, there's a very important question, as you already told, what should be the contents of such an introduction? Well, since German universities define public history as research about historical representation beyond school and universities, an introduction should focus on the epistemological and methodological basics students need to know to grasp their new subject of research. In the German case, that would mean an introduction to concepts like historical culture, memory concepts, critical heritage studies. Beyond that, and I totally agree here with Katie, it is important to offer a first glance at major institutions and media of public history to just get to know their field. I think a short introduction here helps to orientate in a study field, helps to reflect on one's own interests, and may help to form a decision where to start a first internship. And I think there is another approach, which I think we can only do because we have so much time in, creating an introduction, and that is dealing a bit more with the term of communicating history. Because most of the jobs you find in Germany, and I think also in Western Europe, has somehow implicated a kind of communicating history to a broader audience. And I found it very important to think a bit more about what this communication means. And in Germany, we rely for that on a history of didactics and think about, okay, what actually happens when we consume history? How can we describe historical thinking, historical learning? And we try to use these concepts to formulate criteria on quality for public history. So my basic goal actually is when the students finish the introduction amongst just feeling a bit more at home in fields of public history, is that they can define what public history means for them, and that they also can develop criteria for good public history, and of course can argue about that. And that is then the starting point for their first research and their first contacts with the practitioners. So I think there are many things that we work in similar ways. And I think what we do a bit more probably is only because we have a bit more time and more courses to do that.
Thank you, Christian. George?
I'm doing a master's program at the Hellenic Open University. First of all, hello to everyone. Can you hear me? That's important. Basically, it's a new program. It's 3 or 4 years old. It's really more on a theoretical basis. Now they are trying to change a lot of things because they understand that there are weaknesses, there are flaws in the program, and that is good. Discussing previous week and this week, I remember theory and practice, and having a pre-discussion with the two professors, I saw that there are really things that have to change. But let's go back to the introduction. The introduction has to do mostly with what I would call Greek issues, like what has happened in Greece, like the World War II, like the Civil War, something that has been going on as a discussion, like the Macedonian question. There's a lot of discussion about the Holocaust and the Jews that lived in Greece. But basically, we are not going out to the field and, we're not creating projects. And this is something that has really hasn't helped me to improve, I must say. We don't have that concept of, working together as a network. Maybe in the future this will change, and I'm sure it will change. Anyway, most people don't want to discuss more philosophical or more social issues like representation, or what does it mean to have create a documentary and present it to the public, or discussions about space, which for me is very important. If I have time, I would like to say which were the main issues or the main topics that we discussed at the introduction. These were the different ways people perceive history. And because Greeks are supposed to have a more than 2,000-year-old history, what does it mean to be a Greek and to perceive history in contemporary Greece? A third issue we discussed, and there were lots of debates, is why would someone be interested in the past, and how historians use and abuse the past. As I said earlier on, these are more theoretical issues. I'm sure that they have helped, but I imagine that when one starts working, like going to a museum or creating a movie or consulting other people, there are more practical issues that have to be, encountered, have to be faced. This is what has really puzzled me. The professors, everyone who's teaching, they are very good. They are very helpful, but I think that there has to be a shift more towards practice and less towards theory. I know that you're smiling. I can see that. That means that you understand that somebody can study theory on his own, can ask for help, but practice is something where you have to change your ideas, your concepts, maybe even your feelings about history. So that is what is important for me. Next semester is my last semester. I will be doing my paper, and I'm not sure what to do. I'm moving towards having like a history and films, or how people are represented in the films, and what does, like professor says, do we really ask the people who are watching the films, who pay for the films, what are their opinions about history, and what does the film mean to them? Public history is a new discipline. It has a long way to go. I know people have I've read most of the articles that have been written on public history the last 5-10 years. I really like public history, but I mean it has to move beyond just exposing history to the public. We all have negative and positive examples, and I think this is what people should discuss.
Thank you, George, and you've triggered some discussion already in the chat, and I would like for you to go back to this question of definition, because an introduction is also to introduce students to a field, but you don't want to impose a definition of public history. So how do you balance introducing them to the definitions of public history and them finding their own approach of public history? Do you guide them? Do you leave them try and experience their approach? Would you like to share your experience with us?
Okay, I just waited now because I thought Katie might want to start, but I can do that, of course. Yeah, there are a lot of definitions, and of course we can just use 40 years of NCPH discussions and rework them with German approaches and European approaches, and actually it's quite funny. What I try to do is use those definitions to show how public history developed through the age, through 40 decades, and show, okay, we started there, and every definition just mirrors those developments in the field, the institutionalizations and the approaches from different countries, from different scientific cultures, you could say it like that. And I want to make sure that they know when they study history at a university and public history, that means another approach to public history as when working within a museum and approaching public history. And this way, of course, I do guide them. I do tell them what I find is most helpful in this situation and how to approach our research object and how to approach this field and how to define it. But the main question for my students is always to position themselves after the first semester. So this is really quite a call I do upon them. I know it's tricky, but they master that because they know that this is what I require of them to really, where do I come from? What do I want to do with this public history field? And where do I position myself? And this is, I think, a very heavy cognitive approach, but it helps them to position themselves and to know after the first semester, do I want to do this or do I need to change something in my study?
Yeah, I would say the way we do the definition in my class, and I'm not teaching graduate students. I'm teaching, first through fourth years, and it could be anywhere in there. And like I said, all variety of backgrounds. What we usually do is we do some readings, we do some discussion, and then one thing I found that really works in my class is, and it's worked well on Zoom because we have the chat function. In class, we have, giant paper and markers, and we write it out. But I have them get into small groups and create their own definition and then sort of pull key terms that they've, that have stuck with them over the previous weeks. And one thing I do is I've made a word cloud. I don't know if you're familiar with a word cloud, where you put all your terms in and it makes a pretty graphic. So I usually try to do that as well with the terms that are repeated over and over, and it's just kind of a nice representation of what this class thinks, and it's different every semester. So we do try to get the key things like shared authority, reflective practice, working with communities and those things in there, but it's always different. And I think that kind of also shows the field of public history is always evolving and changing.
Yes, this is something that has really puzzled me because regardless of the different definitions on public history, is there a convergence or a divergence as far as the issues and the topics are concerned? Because from what I see, when we have presentations at the university, there are many and different kind. For example, I presented the way the Soviet Union was born and how it collapsed. Other people presented the Civil War. Others had to dealt with the Holocaust. So what does one want to represent really? What does one want to show? And when he tries to show this specific subject, does he want to prove something, or is he researching something? I'm not sure yet. I think it reminds me a little bit of many documentaries on History Channel, which I don't really appreciate, which I've seen behind the scenes, how they make some documentaries, which are really fake. They're not worth any discussion about history. So do we want to just give them like a condensed piece of history, which they will consume or gobble up in like 20 or 30 minutes, and they will be satisfied? Or are we approaching a more historian view? This is my concern.
Thank you, George, Katie, and Christine. I think it also depends on the objective of the class. If you teach undergrad, if you teach graduate students, obviously it's different. If you have students from different disciplines, not only history or biology and so on, obviously your teaching will be different. And the question is, do you want to expose your students to how public history is done, consumed, produced outside? So you talk about monuments, you talk about films, or which could be very interesting for undergraduates because they get interested in the production. Or if it's more a graduate class and then you want to prepare your students to have a career in public history, and maybe then the theory and the skills that you teach will be different. So do you try to expose? Do you try to make them build a career? What's your objective when you start a class? Or I guess both. Katie.
Yeah, I saw this in the chat. I saw that Jack had a question about teaching these courses. And I've sort of been experimenting with my core classes, so just the history class that everyone has to take. In the past, it's been called Western Civ, and I teach it as like ancient cultures pretty much because my background is in Egyptology. So there's, I teach the history and like the history of Egypt and pyramids, and we go all the way through Greece and Rome, and I teach that, but then I bring in public history principles, I guess you would say, into that class. So I have them do assignments like we do one on museum objects and cultural patrimony and repatriation. So even with these first year students, we're talking about the history of Greece, since George is here. And we talk about the history of Greece. And one of their assignments after we talk about Greece is, what about the Parthenon marbles? They're in the London British Museum. Some of them are in Athens. So we talk about that as a case study, but then I also have them go on museum websites and look at collections and find artifacts and have a discussion about, whatever artifact they're interested in. And we talk about where it's from, how it got there, what the current communities want those items, where they want them to be. So that sort of takes these students who might not be interested at all in history and introduces them to public history. And then they start to think, oh, maybe history isn't boring, which is what they've sort of been conditioned to believe. So that's one thing I'm really interested in, is just sort of hooking people and using public history to get people just even interested in history. So monuments, repatriation, all these sort of controversial topics can really help with that.
And this is something that Jack was asking about. If public history skills should not be, side skills that we teach in addition to history skills, but if public history skills should not be taught in the mainstream courses, like your Western Civ or a simple introduction to history, for which you would have public history discussions, because history in itself is very much public. Is that something that you think could work to convince colleagues that traditional courses in history, it's also about public history? Does that make any sense, or do you see challenges? Yeah, Christine.
I think it depends a bit. on the one hand, of course, the public history program cannot be run by one person alone. So you always need a group of colleagues working with you. And of course, many of them engage in one way or another into spheres of public history. For example, colleagues from ethnology are working with World Heritage projects and stuff like that. Archaeologists are trying to help out and, watch with us movies and doing research on how archaeology is shown in documentaries or fictional movies or something like that. This is the first thing. So that always happens. The other thing is that there are approaches to ways of public history already within the field. I already mentioned memory studies, for instance. This is a very powerful research branch concerning contemporary history, especially Holocaust history and so forth. So actually people are engaging in research on public history, and we can of course use that and point out that it is important to train those skills within a normal history class. We can also try to make the classical historian, academic historian see that it's important for all people to be able to analyze films, to analyze exhibitions and so forth, but not always there is time and not always the people see the need to really train in that. And they're quite happy if someone says, okay, we will do that next to a few other things. But what is important, at least in Germany, is teachers are trained within university programs in history. And teachers, of course, need to be able to teach their students when they are finally in school how to work with all kinds of historical culture. So these, especially these research skills, these skills on reflection, they need to be trained nonetheless. And sometimes this is done completely in historical didactical courses or in public history courses, and sometimes also in classical historical classes.
I think that I said it before, but I think I should repeat it, that since public history is a multidisciplinary theme, it will evolve. I don't know in which direction it will move towards, but I think it will evolve a lot. Most people whom I ask when we are, my fellow students, what do they want to do? Why are they doing public history? Are they interested in working at memorial sites, or are they interested in producing a film or like a podcast or so? What do they want to do? Most of them are teachers, and they just want to improve the way they approach history. In Greece, we have a very tight, maybe I should call it ideological perspective on on history books. Taught at school, something which has been going on for many years. I don't want to talk politics, but unfortunately it is true. And there are many arguments on how history should be taught at school. So all these people who follow the master's program want to improve themselves, want to know how to teach history better at school for their students, for their children. This is the basic concern in Greece as far as public history is concerned. It has to do with this problem. I would say that there are many aspects, as both of you have said and repeated. In Greece, we have many memorial sites, we have many antiquities, but public history is not focusing on these opportunities, where people could work there and help. I don't know what will happen. We will see in the long run.
Thank you, George, Chris, and Katie. And I'm trying to keep track of the questions. Some very good questions. One that resonates directly with what you just said, George, from Julian, I think, on interdisciplinarity. How do you deal with that? And Katie, you were mentioning museum studies, and you have so many different approaches, like art history, museum studies, archaeology, anthropology, folklore. It's overwhelming. So do you pick what you want? Do you try to expose them to some readings? How do you deal with those multiple approaches? Easy question.
Easy question. Yeah. Um, Well, at my school, I said this in the chat, but the history department is not so much interested in public history as these other departments on my campus. So my closest partner in crime, I call her at my school, is an archaeologist, and so she's worked in museums. She does public archaeology, which is a related field. She's an anthropologist. And so, we have very similar backgrounds. And even though she's not even in the same college as me, we do all of our work together. And so that's, it's sort of in that case, I have her, and then I have two art historians and a digital landscapes person that I work with most closely. And I'm still trying to get the history people on board with public history. So in my case, it's just sort of been who's available to do these projects with me. And I'm teaching museums right now and working with the archaeologist, and we're working with our local tribe to create an exhibit at the museum. So with 40 students and 2 professors and a bunch of community members. So it's just sort of been what's available and who's willing to work with me more than anything else.
I may have to add a few notes on that. I think we have to differentiate between what of transdisciplinary ideas and concepts we should put into an introduction and what should be part of a public history program itself. And I'm absolutely positive that transdisciplinary approaches are totally vital for a public history program. And therefore, I can use the part of my introduction that is a lecture, where I can really tell the students quite a lot of things. They don't have to read that much and process of their own, but I can just give examples and introductions and try to make them see, okay, there are so many different sciences and they all kind of deal with public history, but they use different concepts, they use different terms. And as soon as you start to gain access to these terms and concepts, you can communicate between disciplinaries. And this really helps so much then in your later course of your master program, your first experiences in internships and so forth. But really for an introduction, it is very important to keep it close to your own science or the science where most of the students come from, and to have, I think, in mind where a few other students come from. So if we have people from, I don't know, anthropology, archaeology, I try to always point that out. Okay, now, so this is the basic line a classical historian does. But if you are from, I don't know, working with another region or another something beyond contemporary history, I would call it, then you might use different terms. Then you might use different approaches. And what can we learn from that? What can we take from that? And I just give one example so that they see, okay, it's very helpful. Beyond the introduction, we really start working in transdisciplinary teams, and it requires a lot of work and a lot of personal I don't know, work to make that happen and to find the colleagues and to bind them together and to bind the students together and to really help all of the students to work on one project regarding or not regardless what main discipline they came from. Yeah. But Katie, you also mentioned the cross between theory and practice. Maybe, Thomas, I don't know whether we should also talk a bit about that, because I think that's also a main point that George already mentioned, that the students that start public history want to do practice. I don't know.
Sometimes there is, I've noticed it in with my fellow students, there is what I call inertia. That means that they are stuck with other disciplines and they don't really know what to do. For example, I say, why don't we try to do a project on our own? So finally, we found some oral history groups here based in Greece, and I'm trying to participate in these oral history groups and help the groups and help myself understand and maybe, supersede some impediments that arise from everyday practice with public history. To protect people, confidentiality, if you can gain the correct meaning or idea of what someone is trying to say through oral history and so on. I just want to give you an idea of what the courses are in the master's program in Greece. There are really 10, but we only do 9. The last one is something that you can select. There's the introduction, there's theories of history and historiography. There's also history and sources, history and education, history and media. I just want to point out that we are talking about the newspapers and the television. We are not talking about social media, which is something totally different. There's history and space. I really found myself, I was surprised that there are so many things happening in space, which I had no idea how space changes, and I really enjoyed it. There's applied history, history and state institutions, history and cinema, and public history in the digital age, which is more close to social media, but not actually social media. Of course, there are other things that I can propose myself, like hermeneutics. How does one approach public history? What does one want to show with public history? How does one explain public history? And we always have conversations about statues, for example, which is something in vogue. When there are people who tear down symbols of oppression, we always say that it's from the right or from the left. But there are people from the right that bring down symbols, and it also happens on the other side. So one has to use counter examples as well. We must be very careful how we tread when we discuss about these issues, because we can fall in big traps. So that's why I'm happy that I'm here, and I hope I've helped in something. I believe that public history approaches democracy, or at least what I think is democracy. But we have to improve ourselves, as well as the public has to improve itself in understanding history. If public history is not something that can be consumed easily. If it is consumed easily, then that means that we have failed in our goals, in our aims. I don't know if you agree or not.
That's a difficult question. We have some time, and maybe we can answer that. But to go back to the question that Christian wanted to deal with, and that's also a question from Will. Theory, practice, guest. This semester I'm teaching an intro to public history, and I have a few guests for the simple reason that sometimes, they know more than I do, and it's someone doing the thing to tell my students what they do every day. Do you use guests in an introduction to public history? Is it too much time consuming? And if so, what type of guest do you ask for your intro?
So actually, just to make the picture a bit broader, there is a heavy discussion in German-speaking countries regarding public history, how much practice is allowed in such a program, because universities are really research-focused and they have to, let's say, distinguish themselves from colleges that are more focused on practical trainings. So it's always important to keep the research level quite high. So we could say that in German-speaking countries, the proportion of theory and practice in master programs of public history ranges between 60 and 70% theory and 30 to 40% practice. Practice then includes study modules, at least 2 courses completely designated to work with practitioners in the field, like making an exhibition, programming an app or other forms, and taking at least a 3-month for an internship. So that's quite a lot of time, actually. But how much practice then is important and good for an introduction? Well, leaving the practice out would make an introduction quite dull. I think, George, you already mentioned that. And besides that, I also think that most students long for their first steps into the world of public history, at least when they are in the master program. They want to make a first experience of, you could say, a kind of change of perspective and transform from the visitor or user of public history to a public history researcher or practitioner. And I think a very good way to stimulate that in an introduction course is by including first excursions and second workshop talks with practitioners in an introduction course. And this way we create little experiences for the students. We support them in forming a group through excursions, starting a kind of change of perspective and helping them to create their first networks. And that works again with excursions and with those workshop talks where we just, for example, dealing for one session with the latest developments in museums and how to approach museums as a kind of research object. And then we get somebody to talk with us, okay, I'm just now setting up a new museum, a new exhibition. What are the steps that are important for me? How will I do this? Or what is a museum has to do with politics and with culture? And how do I create, so many things? How do I find working force with them? Or what is my digital strategy right now? Very important. And this we can discuss. And so the students learn to approach a field of public history first from a theoretical perspective, from a research point of view, and then to combine that with insights of practice field. And of course, we cannot do that with all the fields and with all the media, but we try to focus on those who are most important for the students. And I do this by just asking them when we start a seminar. I always leave out a few sessions by the end of the term and say, okay, what is your most important thing? What we really want to engage with? And sometimes the people say we want to engage with TV persons, with museums, with living history actors or people who create that, or with people from the gaming industry or whatever. And then I try to find people who are willing to talk with us and engage with us. So it's always just a small insight into fields of public history, but it really helps to not being so dull, not being so theoretical all the time, and not just focusing only on the research, but to show them why this is important for, or what this is important for.
What I would like to ask Christine is, give us a few examples of people you've invited and what were the reactions of the students? This would be very interesting.
Whom are you asking?
Both, but Christine referred to inviting people from the gaming industry, for example. I don't like video games or any sort of games nowadays, and it seems to me very strange that there is a strong relationship, or they're trying to build a strong relationship with public history. It has really puzzled me.
Well, gaming is indeed a bit tricky on that because, the gaming industry you cannot invite them, but you can try to find, okay, who's doing what in the field. And for example, regarding gaming, we are now focusing on a very great research. We could say research circle regarding analog gaming and digital gaming, and try to just invite them and talk with them about how do they research about gaming, what is important beyond just bashing ego shooters or something like that. What is beyond that? So how the people are doing research right now? How do they engage with the games? How can they find information? Very important. How do they deal with having to play the game themselves and making themselves to a kind of part of the research then? How do they reflect on that and stuff like that? So this is more a kind of focusing on research and learning the media, better to know that way. But for example, when we talked about television and history in television, we were able to get the head of the Office of History Productions from the most important broadcast in Germany. And they just said, okay, we have so many times not answered your calls, but now we are willing because we need more people. We are getting old, we are getting in retirement, and we need fresh people from the start. This was really so nice. And we were really allowed to ask them all the critical stuff you already mentioned when you are sitting in front of your TV. Why did you use that music? Or why just did you muse with those sources and just transform them into something that is not really shown there and explained there, and all the stuff like that. And I really try to answer it and try to say, okay, this is how we produce, and this is why we are doing this, and this is where we fear we lose our viewers when we're doing a different style or something like that. And of course, you have to be sure that people who are willing to come to you can handle those questions. And if you are not sure, you shouldn't do this in this way. Sometimes it really helps to visit the people in their working sphere and, just showing them that you care. This is really something I train with my students. Not only be critical about it from a kind of ivory tower perspective and say, no, we know how to do it better, or we can criticize it, but to really say, okay, just learn what they are doing, learn how they're doing it, and then try again and formulate your questions, formulate your critics, and get into communication. And I think this is exactly the approach that helps the people that study public history to be more successful, to gain, to get their first job, actually. Most of the times people talking to me is, your students, they are not just the better ones, but they try to understand what we are doing. And it really helps to start a communication and to start a work. And maybe this is the first step we can, we can ask them to do.
Yeah, in my intro classes, I always have guest speakers. Usually try to do that in person, or we go on field trips to museums or wherever people are doing public history. One thing I found with everything being locked down this past year is people are willing to do Zoom calls or WebEx calls or whatever it might be. And so when I taught in the fall, I had probably 15 different people who were willing to come talk about their experience. And students like that because, for one, it's not me that they have to listen to the whole time. And for another thing, they can ask questions and, figure out, how did you come to work at an archive? What steps did you take to get there? Or, what is your everyday life like? And one thing the students always ask is what is the best part of your job? What's the worst part of your job? So that they can get a feel for what everyday life is like in this field. So I think guest speakers are really important. Great if you can go there. I'm also in an area that doesn't have, we're not a city, so we don't really have a lot of resources. So having the digital aspect has been really helpful this year, and I hope we can continue that going forward. But we do have the coast, we have the beach.
I don't know if the participants would like to ask a question. I have a question, which is, I think, very important. But before I say that, I must say that the Hellenic Open University, of course, is distance learning. Unfortunately, sometimes we do meet, but because of the coronavirus, we haven't met. And I'm going to finish my master's, and I won't have met any teacher, only on Zoom or WebEx. The question, however, is your students evaluate you. I would like to hear the negatives, not the positives.
Great question, George. Christine, Katie, who wants to start?
Well, of course, Katie, please do.
Oh, well, I was trying to think of negatives. I would say last semester, because of coronavirus, we didn't do the same group project as usual, but when I've done the group project in the past, A negative that I always get is that students don't like always working in a group because they have to rely on others and communicate with others. And, that's really a big indicator of whether or not you're going to be good in this field, I guess, because that's life. That's how it is when you're working with community partners. So I always get complaints about group work, but as we've all said, that's part of it. That's what we got to do.
You created a competition, George, in the chat on who's going to have the worst comment evaluation. I think so far Joanna is winning.
Okay, I never had a comment like that, but we have quite closed evaluation forms, so maybe that's because of that. No, actually, group work is an issue, but in my courses, master courses, more from another way around, because I force them really fast into group work after a bit of getting to know how the thing is working and what I'm doing. And they said, okay, how can we transform our group discussions in reliable knowledge? And quite normally this works when we are together in one classroom, and we really had to experience a bit in the first 2 to 3 weeks how can we make that we have enough time to discuss this with all the students, that everybody really gets a kind of security. Okay, where are the important points? What does she really want from us? And this takes more time in digital frames to really, without reading body language and stuff like that, to really get to know, okay, this is really what she's focusing on. And I'm trying to do this much more focused now and really explaining explicitly goals for each session and goals for the seminar. And again, trying to say, okay, now we are doing an excursion or in this and this topic, but the bigger frame is that. And as the more I try to explain that and really be transparent about it, the better the students worked with it. And all the students said it was absolutely necessary that I forced them into communication without me. And I have to work, maybe Juliana can help. I suggested they doing a regulars table. I don't know if this is the right word. Stammtisch would be the German word for it. So where they really meet and just normally they would maybe drinking beer or wine or whatever, so that they meet in the evening and discuss something, just being students in a pandemic, in a really frightening situation without me. That they get to know each other, that they learn to trust each other. And there was really a moment where I felt now they are working together as groups, and I can mix them in small different groups so that they really learn, the whole group get to know each other. And then this was working, and they really said this saved them. Really, one student wrote to me, it saved their study to be able to rely on this group, because otherwise they would have felt completely lost in a total Zoom seminar sphere, without any personal contact. And I think this is also a kind of luxury situation, because I really can rely to the students as a group. It's not always possible in a master's program to do this. So this was really helpful.
Yes, I would say that where there is a will, there is a way, even if it goes down the road of alcohol or something else. Yes, this is important. I'm really taking this very seriously, and maybe I'm thinking of creating a group when I finish of public history in Greece, where we will train, laymen, just simple people who are interested in history, but not just saying it, not just repeating what we are saying, but to go out and do research. So this is why I'm interested so much in what you have been saying all along. I think, like we usually say in Greece, maybe they also say it in other countries too, the theory is gray, but practice is colorful. So this is important. It's very important. That's all. I don't have anything else to say. I don't have the participants have anything to
I
say.
do have one more thing. We're running out of time, but I would like to ask you one last question, because I believe, Katie, you're in the working group in C²DH about teaching public history online, right? And, we've all experienced this lockdown situation, and I've taught 2 courses intro supposedly on site that moved online. And a lot of Master of Public History are now created online, fully online. Would you have a brief experience of what you think works all right online, teaching an introduction to public history?
Sure. And I saw that Will is here as well, and he's also in that working group. So we're actually presenting about that on Friday. We're doing a workshop on that. So yeah, it's something we've been thinking about a lot. The National Council on Public History here in the US had a working group where we had 4 leaders, and then we had like 20 other professors who joined in to sort of come up with best practices and ideas over the summer as we were preparing for being all online this year. So things that work really well online, like I said, having the guest speakers and having a really wide opportunity to have different people come to class has been really good. So I've had people in England, Ireland, different time zones, different countries able to come to my class that I might otherwise not have had in class. Another thing is using the breakout rooms has been pretty helpful. So rather than just having 20 students and me in one big room with all of the blank squares where you can't see anybody, putting them into those smaller groups, and even if they aren't down at the bar with their wine, at least they're not, with me standing over them. So that's been really helpful as well, to have that option, to have them away from me, but still hopefully having those discussions. And I always give them a task that they have to bring back to class so that they're not just sitting there not doing anything. But having that sort of experience away from me, I think, is pretty important.
Well, thank you, Katie. Unless George, Christine, you want to add something on online practices, I think we've answered most of the questions in the chat. Christine, George,
yeah, I might be able to add a few things. What really helps is taking your time with new digital tools. And the more time we take to learn together how to use those tools, the more effective they become and the more it really helps. But I think what really showed us 1 year of Zoom, only because I find the tool fancy, my students doesn't need to find that fancy too, and they need time to engage with it and learn how to use it. And as long as we give them the time and explain why we think it is helpful to use it for this question I gave them, then it works. And another thing I want to mention, which I find quite interesting, is exams are getting better. I have oral exams in my introduction course, and I noticed that there are so many wonderful, great students now. First of all, they told me because I have now to lecture, to record my lectures. And that means they really can, besides all the group discussions, just press the stop button and trying to think, what did I just say? And rephrase that for their own questions. And we are really discussing much more deeply now because they have more time in engaging what I told in the lectures. And the second thing, I guess, is having an oral exam over Zoom allows the students to stay in their safe place and to not having to go to my office, sit with foreign people there and have a, it's not everybody kind of style. So they made it absolutely fabulous, sitting in their own homes and showing what they all learned this year. And I think this is a quite positive effect, and I just wanted to share that with you.
This is a very interesting question, which cannot be answered in a few minutes. There are times that I detest the digital era, but sometimes I say this is very good because I've met people like you. We can start a discussion in a few seconds, and we will even have an online conference soon, if I'm not mistaken. The one that's was supposed to be held in Poland. All these things have a negative and a positive aspect, which cannot be discussed, as I said, in a few seconds or in a few minutes. But however, I would like to thank Thomas. He has been working hard for public history, and it shows, and I must say that. And I'm happy to be here, and I hope that I've contributed just a little bit to changing things. I would like to thank all of you and the participants and the speakers.
Well, I'm thanking you, George, and Christine and Katie for this great discussion. And I couldn't agree more that we're doing things with people from Germany, Greece, US, Indonesia, Italy. So it's great. And I'm very much enjoying our discussion in the chat as well. If you can take a minute to look at the chat before you log off, so you have a few links. I will keep the link and the meeting open so that you can access the NCPH conference program if you want to attend Katie's talk on Friday. We also have the International Federation meeting at 12 on Friday, but I think your workshop is right after. And you also have other links for teaching, so I will keep that open, and the video is recorded and will be shared on Vimeo later, well, probably next week, and we will send you an email with the link. So this should be available and shareable. So again, thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you for attending. Thank you for your comments, your questions, and let's meet again for the next international discussion. Thank you, everybody.